Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Worcester, your host, and we have longtime researcher Jan Aldrich on the show this evening. Now, I have heard Jan's name since I started looking seriously into this topic, and he has a stellar reputation, pun intended, as a researcher. We'll be discussing his work, and you might want to go check out his website. He's been digitally documenting UFOs, the modern UFOs, since 1947. He's been doing this work since 1995 at www.project1947.com. You remember how computers were in 1995? I think it was dial-up only. And when you heard that weird noise, whatever it was, and things moved very, very slowly. That's what I remember about back in those days. Now, Jan just called us. He's on the road. He's coming home. So I might be pulling Bill Skywatcher, who helps out with the show. We're not going to be able to take calls tonight because Jan's going to be on the call-in system. Now, I've been touting James Fox's movie, James Fox's movie, The Phenomenon, as it lives up to the work you'd expect from him. And as I mentioned before, if you are newish to the UFO field, you really don't want to miss this. You know, there are some people, a few people I saw, there's always people that are complaining about things. It's just the way it is. I understand that a few people have said, well, there's nothing new in it. But guess what? There is some new things in it. There's, for instance, the first time that the radar, I guess you would call them techs or whatever, came forward at the Rendlesham Forest. And there's a few first times for a lot of things. There's some footage from the 1978 UFOs at the United Nations. All good stuff. Now, I have also said there's different ways of buying it. You can buy it on Apple TV, Amazon Prime Video, Vimeo, and Vudu. You can also buy it on iTunes. And if you want to get the extras, because I made the mistake, I bought it on Apple TV, and I thought I wanted to support James, even though I got to watch the screener. But I also wanted to see the extras, so I bought it on Apple TV, thinking I would be watching these extras. And no, you're not going to be watching them on Apple TV. The only place you're going to be watching the extras on, and they're free when you buy the movie for like $19.99 or whatever it is Vimeo and iTunes. Those are the only two places you can buy it where you get the extras. And I apologize for those out there who have bought this thinking they're going to get the extras on other platforms and did not get it. So if part of that's my fault, I really do apologize, because I did tell people I thought Apple TV is where you get the extras. It's not. It's iTunes. So next week, we actually have James Fox on the show. He's on for the first part of the show, the first hour or so. And then after that, we have Charles Lear. He's the one that does our blogs and audio blogs. He wrote me jokingly that he said following James Fox would be like following Led Zeppelin with a kazoo, using a kazoo. I thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, but I think he'll do just fine. He does a great job. He takes the topic seriously. He does some great research, great blogs and audio blogs. And this week's blog is UFOs, Flying Saucers, and the Bender Mystery. It's about Albert Bender. And you can find that over at podcastufo.com.
Martin, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think we may have Jan calling us right now.
All right. Yeah, bring him in.
He's on. All right. Jan, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you?
Great.
All right. So we'll be bringing Jan in. Good. We got him on landline. He's at home and all ready to go. So I want to thank everyone that listens to the show. And I also want to thank everyone behind the scenes. I really appreciate your help. So many people do help out, and I really do appreciate that. Palmer always sends me updated UFO news clips, things like that. And of course, our blogger and everyone else, thank you so much. And we are now simulcast over on Facebook and on Twitch and YouTube, and of course, KGRA Radio. And if you'd like to help out the show for $2 or more a month, all you have to do is go over to our website, once again, podcastufo.com, and you can see the support the show page over there. No calls this evening. We had to have Jan call in using our calling platform. But as usual, we will have questions in chat, and we may have a surprise after the break of an hour, at the top of the hour. May have someone else joining us for a few minutes. So that is it. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to the show, Jan. Can you hear me, Jan? Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to be there.
Yeah, Jan, I have heard your name for a long time. I've been doing the show now it's coming up in just a couple of weeks. It's going to be 9 years now. I never thought it would last this long, and I'm still enjoying it, still learning. And I have heard your name. I've talked a lot with Chris Lambright and other people, and Dave Marler, of course, and have heard your name as just a real stellar researcher. And I'm honored to have you on the show. You've been at it a long time, right?
Nearly 60 years. Well, probably over 60 years now.
Oh my goodness. Well, how did you get started all the way back then? What got you involved in the
Christmas vacation during junior high, and there was a snowstorm, which is it's unusual to have lightning during a snowstorm, but we did. And the house got hit, and I was making cinnamon toast in the oven, and opened the oven, and there's a small ball of light about as big as a quarter resting over the grate. It wasn't touching the grate, but it was just over it. And as I opened the door, it started to roll out, and it fell, and then it exploded just like a cherry bomb going off.
Weird.
And I fell over backwards because it was such a shock. And when my father came home, who was a chemist, I asked him what was going on, and he said, "I don't know. That's what the library's for. Go down and look it up." So, that's exactly what I did, and I settled on the idea that it was ball lightning. And it was very interesting because I looked in the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it said, "Scientists doubt that this exists." So after that, I everything I could find on ball lightning in the library and elsewhere, I looked at. And after that, after a while, I got involved in UFOs because it seemed like another unusual aerial phenomena. So I got interested in that when I read Ruppelt's book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, by the head of Project Blue Book from approximately 51 to 53.
Right. When did he write that book? We just did a blog about that, and I have the book here on my shelf, the original. When was it?
1956.
Wow, yeah. I have the original book, I'm happy to say. And that I've told people over the years, that is a really good book, a real good book a go-to book.
Yeah, that has, some of his information is third and fourth hand. However, some of it is, even though it's third and fourth hand in cases, it's the only information we've got on certain periods that happened. So it's an important book to read, and everybody should read it if they're going to be interested in this subject. It gives you a good idea about what happened during this short period, about 2.5 years, when the investigation was more open. So Not saying it was completely open, and there's all kinds of things we found since then. For example, I have copies of Ruppelt's papers. It's about
Really?
4 or 5 boxes of material, notes he kept, and he kept summaries of UFO cases that he got from his one of his subordinates after he left Wright-Patterson, after he left the Air Force. So that's an interesting thing. We've got so that has historical significance, because in writing the book, he put his notes on index cards. There's about 300 index cards that he's got. A lot of it he didn't use in the books. He cut it down. And his first draft, I have that. So
Wow.
he also cut certain things out of there that are interesting. And there were certain things that he got wrong. I mean, he thinks that he thought, up till the time I guess he died, that Battelle, he was the one that suggested that some kind of computerized study should be done, and Battelle had already been contracted to that before he was ever in the UFO business. That had already been done. So that's in the book there, and also in some of his writings, but that was not correct. Air Force intelligence documents indicate that that was already programmed in before he ever became part of the UFO investigations.
Now, what do you think about his? There's a little bit of controversy in his changing opinion. Why he changed his opinion on the topic of what a UFO is, and it had to do with the satellites. You know that I believe, or something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, he wrote a different. He wrote 3 additional chapters to his book.
Right, that's right.
Which one was pretty straight. It just gave more of the history up to the time of the added chapters, and the other 2 were rather negative. It's hard to tell exactly where he was in UFOs. He tells some people one day he was, I'm really puzzled. I don't know what they are. And the next day he'd be disgusted and say, nah, it's all hokum and stuff. I think he thought that UFOs were going to be a key to a long active duty career. And it didn't turn out that way. He was just in for the Korean War. They brought in a lot of reservists for the Korean War, and he was one of them. And when the war started to wind down, he was returned to civilian status.
Right, and now
I was thinking when he left in 1953, he gave some rather negative comments about UFOs.
Yes.
Then he wrote a thing for True magazine, which was a really popular men's magazine at the time.
Yeah.
And the editor of True magazine told him, if you don't write this in an objective manner, it won't be accepted by the public. So he was pretty. He was on the fence in that article, and he got $2,000 for the article, which in the 1950s, that is a lot of money. That was a down payment on a house.
Absolutely.
So he decided to write the book after that, and he kept the same sort of objective thing. But I always thought that he was probably not. He was. He wasn't objective, I don't think, and he pretty much thought the UFOs were explainable. So, no doubt, the Air Force may have brought some pressure on him, but I think he was amenable to having the chapter changed. Even though he had given an interview in '57, he had said that he thought that with the electromagnetic effects demonstrated in the Southwest United States, that UFOs should be the investigation should be ramped up. But then shortly after that, he added his more or less debunking chapters. The people at Civilian Saucer Intelligence in New York more or less said, well, this is his attitude anyways. Because he had spoken with them, and they were not impressed with his so-called objectivity.
Right. He died very young, like 37 or something.
He had a type A personality, and we talked to one of the lieutenants that worked for him, and we told him, he was unaware that Ruppelt had died, and we told him that, and he said, "I'm not surprised. He's a type A personality. He could never." He was very hyper, so.
How about that?
He said, you could almost see it. He was very into it, and he was really young.
Yeah,
so he may have had
very young.
Some heart condition that brought that on, but
yeah. So we mentioned his book, and just while we're on the topic of books, do you think if you had to follow that book, because I have a lot of people that are listening to the show, I get a number of emails each week. People are new to the topic, and a lot of people are looking for, hey, I just got an email 2 days ago. Someone said, what is the go-to book? What are books for me to learn? Do you have any other suggestions besides that book?
Well, of course, the book that we did, UFOs and Government by Michael Swords and Robert Powell.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah, well, that's a good one. Right.
That's got, that was 5 years in the writing, and has a lot of official governments. It is about the UFOs and government reaction to them. There's a lot of mythology in UFOs, so you won't find many of these current things like Men in Black and all this other falderall that's going on. We actually base this on what we could actually prove or reference. Is rather carefully done. Even so, anything like this, new information becomes available as soon as it's down on paper, and in some cases we did make a few errors, but as general, it's head and shoulders above most books.
Excellent. What's the title to that book one more time? I'm going to put it in the chat.
UFOs and Government, and it's by Dr. Michael Swords and by Robert Powell. But we have a section about the Spanish government. We have a section about the Australian government, the French government, a little bit about Brazil, very little, but and one or two others that we just Sweden and foreign nationals, the ones that are familiar with their governments, were the ones that wrote those sections.
Wow. I have a question for you. Earlier, just a few minutes ago, you mentioned that you had some of Ruppelt's his works and even a draft of his book and things like that. Where do you find things like this? Is this the UFO's archive?
Dr. Swords bought the Ruppelt papers.
Oh,
Somebody else bought them before that, but he got the Ruppelt papers, so I was able to get a copy of them.
I see.
Yeah, for over 50 years, I've been collecting UFO material, and that involves a number of collections of people who have passed away. I have Dr. Willie Smith's papers. I have some other people from Connecticut, and I've gone to people's houses when they've decided they want to throw UFOs to the side and picked up their files. So Andy Roberts from Great Britain, I bought his most of his UFO files, except for some of the Foo Fighters. I got half of the Foo Fighters, and Barry Greenwood got the other half, so we were able to put that together in one file. So that's what I've been doing for years. I've been also going around to archives and things and researching this. I've been to the National Archives many times. I've been to the Air Force Historical Research Agency. I've been to the Naval War College. And about almost 100 state libraries and university libraries. So this is a real extensive data gathering thing, which is not finished. It's never finished.
Wow, that's really something. Yeah. Now you mentioned Wilbert. I think his real name was Wilbert Smith.
No,
is that who?
I mentioned Wilbert. I mentioned Willie Smith.
Oh, it's a different one. Okay.
At a Michigan university.
I see.
Who worked with Hynek during towards the end of Hynek's life.
Ah.
And they put together a thing called the UNICAT, which was supposedly the best cases in ufology. When Hynek left Chicago, he left Center for UFO Studies. He took about 1,000 cases with him, and he and Willie Smith computerized these in what was called the UNICAT. And so I have most of the documents that I have an output of the UNICAT, actually, and I have Willie Smith's most of his files, which include a lot of those cases that Hynek brought with him, or cases that Willie Smith had gathered because he was born in Uruguay, so he had a lot of South American contacts and European contacts, and so this extensive file of material that we're trying to get this all scanned into one place.
Now I have a picture of you it's actually up on YouTube and the other platforms that I have. Is that your library that you're seated in?
No, that's Dr. Michael Swords' basement, where he has all his books and files and
wow,
material that has yet to be sorted. So,
a lot of work.
It does not look like that. Mine looks more like giant piles of things, and I've taken about 5 rooms in my house with stuff, and I've got a huge storage locker full of stuff, and we're slowly trying to get this scanned in. So what we plan to do is a chronological file of UFO cases, digitized, so that you can carry around thousands of cases on a thumb drive.
Wow. That's a work of passion. It has to be to do this.
Right. It is, and we have so far we have. This is an open secret, so there's nothing. I'm not telling you anything that a lot of people don't may not be aware of, but there are enough people that know what's going on. We've done the UFO Files from pre-47 up to about 1965, and from parts of 67 up to 1970. So there's quite a bit of this has already been computerized and digitized. Plus, I've been doing my own files, and Dr. Smith and Andy Roberts from England, and about 24 more people that have helped my research or sent me material, or that I've collected their files. And so this is, I've done this with Barry Greenwood, and he's done most of the work on the UFO Files. He's the one that's done most of the scanning. I've just started.
Wow. And now go ahead.
The UFO Files next year. The COVID virus just completely destroyed any work this year. I'm working on my own files that way, but I also brought, and so did Barry. We each brought 3 large boxes of case files home from Chicago, and that's one of the things we're working on right now. And these were things that were unsorted, or in most cases had been put aside when the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, when it had when Keogh and Gordon Lohr left the organization. So some of this hasn't been looked at for years.
Wow. And when you're sorting through these type of things, are you often surprised at things, that have not been exposed before, or, is there new information?
Yes.
And
so the Minot case in October 1968, this was a critical case, and had they known this about the time of the Condon Committee, had this case been exposed to the public, I think Condon there might have been a different outcome of the whole business. As the Condon Committee was writing their final report, this case happened. B-52 is approaching Minot Air Force Base. It was a nuclear-capable aircraft. They did not have any nukes on it, but it was a check aircraft. They had gone off alert, and so after that, they have to fly it for about 72 hours. They were coming into Minot. People on the ground had already reported, the various ground personnel had already reported UFOs over Minot. And as they approached it, the aircraft was followed by a UFO. Now, the people in the aircraft could not see that because it was behind them, but they could see it on radar. And once that happened, they started taking radar photographs of the radar. So it was recorded. Now, this is in Project Blue Book, but Condon Committee did not consider this case. It was never brought to their attention. As the aircraft, they had to wave off and come back around. As they came back around, the UFO paced them where they could see the UFO. It looked like a red ball with going out from there is like a tunnel or something, and then some kind of attached was something that looked like an axe head, but not an axe head, a mattock head. And apparently that was the front of the object. While it was pacing them, they lost communications with the ground. This is a nuclear capable aircraft. Everything is, you have double of everything. You got 2 radios, and you've got procedures you follow if you lose communications. Switching to different radios and switching to different frequencies did nothing.
Wow.
This thing went ahead and departed from them, and it left them. And then when they landed, they were told send the senior man to the operations center for questioning, and that's what they did. So this is happening during the Cold War. These boxes I told you about, there was a letter from somebody at Minot Air Force Base, and he included the radar photographs.
Wow.
But nobody paid any attention to it because they had got rid of Major Keogh and they got rid of Gordon Lohr, and the guy was running it. He had no idea what he had. I don't think he even read it. In any case, years later, Kufos got the UFO form filled out by the pilot. So Tom Tulene and I went and interviewed Captain Runyon, who was he was the co-pilot. The pilot was sleeping at this time. So, and he did that on purpose because he didn't want a UFO sighting on his record. He wanted to join us, an airline company. He didn't want this on his record, so he purposely went to sleep.
Oh my goodness, about that.
So we interviewed the pilot, and there's also a Czech pilot in there. That's a guy that works on staff, but he wants to keep his flying status there. So he was the senior man on the flight deck at that time. So this guy gave us his story, and we had already looked at the Blue Book file, and this is kind of an impressive case. But when he told us what was going on, it was even more impressive. And we wanted to get in touch with other people on the aircraft. And we had not seen the radar. We had seen the radar photographs in Project Blue Book, but they were really bad.
Mm-hmm.
So we asked him, who were the other people on your crew? And Captain Rennie, he couldn't remember. But then he went into his files and he found a picture of the crew standing out in front of the aircraft on a landing pad, and you could read everybody's name. And once he did that, he could remember the first names and everybody's name. And over the years, we contacted everybody that was still alive, and they were interviewed. And the radar guys, they had their story to tell. It was where you were on the aircraft is how you perceived what was going on. So the radar guy and the electronics countermeasures fellow were both sitting together inside the aircraft. They could not see outside. In fact, when they contacted the UFO, the pilot invited them to come up to the flight deck, and they said, "We're not leaving our place here. If we have to eject, this could be dangerous." The UFO was going over 1,000 miles an hour when it maneuvered, and it was maneuvering behind them. So this is fantastic. Now that's on the radar photographs. Luckily somebody had, the intelligence officer at Minot had kept a copy of the radar photographs, and he'd give them to somebody in Minnesota MUFON. This fellow didn't really know what he had, but he knew it was something good. And when we got hold of it, it was great. And we showed it to, two radar experts evaluated the pictures. One had been the French UFO project head, and one was a controller, an aircraft controller in England, who was very familiar with radar. And so those guys had evaluated, and then we showed it to Dr. Haynes, and he recognized what was happening on the radar photographs immediately. And then we showed them to Colonel Matson down at Air and Space Museum in New Mexico, and the same thing happened. He says, I can see what's going on here. This thing is going back and forth, and it's putting out a tremendous amount of plasma type stuff. You know, it's so.
Now, before you move on from there, can you tell me in what direction the plasma was going off of the object? Was it possibly going ahead of the object?
Around it, yeah. They said, "Hey, this is really really important," and that's where they got the idea is, how far away it was from the aircraft by looking at the radar photographs and the interference that they encountered. So that was it had to be a lot of interference. So,
wow.
If you remember back to the 90s, ABC News did a special on UFOs, and one of the things that they did is they completely inventoried everybody involved in the case. So they investigated from scratch, like we had done nothing, like nobody knew anything about the case. They started from absolute scratch, and Peter Jennings was the newsman that was in charge of that, and he put almost a 3-minute segment on his news program That's that's almost unheard of. That's like, a government assassination or something. They don't usually give that much time to a UFO case, but he gave a lot of time on his news program to this, and then they did a special, which this was one of the main segments of the UFO, and it's all these so-called skeptics. They're afraid of this case. They won't go near it. It's so well investigated, and it's nobody can propose a good idea. The idea that the Air Force said was a plasma ball in the lower atmosphere. Well, if you got a long-lasting plasma ball in the lower atmosphere, you've got all kinds of aerial hazards to aircraft, and that should have been immediately reported as a problem for aircraft, and it should have been reported to the scientists, but it wasn't. In fact, until the investigation of the Minot case was not finished till the Condon report was on the Secretary of the Air Force's desk.
Wow.
So
that's such an interesting story. I don't think that I'm familiar with that case in particular.
No, there's all you have to do is I think it's Minot Air Force Base, October 26th, 1968. I think you can call it up by doing that. That's all the investigations. It's all the supporting documents, the interviews. It's all there. Yeah, see, this is something that a lot of ufologists can't handle either. It's a little complicated for them, so it's not well known. But this is probably one of the best cases on record and really well investigated. You traveled thousands of miles. Excuse me. Investigations involved traveling thousands of miles and spending about $20,000 on this investigation. And then ABC News did it again from scratch.
Yeah. I saw that. That's there's the title to that is, let's see, UFO Seeing is Believing with Peter Jennings. Yeah. How about that? We have a question someone posted in the chat room. Stephen wanted to know, as far as your scanning goes, are you just doing straight scans, or are you doing text reader scan? And text reader scan actually will digitize the text as it's scanning. So that's that hasn't been around. I mean,
we're doing JPEGs and PDFs.
I see.
So,
yeah.
Some of it is Word. Some of it is Word. It depends. However, I think with the way it's the title of each item is date, starting by year, month, and day, and then location. So what country was it in, and what state, and what city, and then what kind of a case was it? Was it a CE2 case, or was it an aircraft case, or was it? So all of that is, you can call that up by doing this. I know that PDFs can be put into readable text, but we're trying to get 9 women pregnant in hopes of having a baby in a month. So kind of.
I don't think I've ever heard that saying, but I understand where you're going with that. That's funny.
That's an army. That's an army thing. I was
you're retired Army. Yeah. So speaking of Army, the Army Air Force at the time, one of the things you've looked into is the Foo Fighters, which I think is fascinating. And can you talk about? There's a little misconception. I've heard people say that they were orbs and lights, but I heard you say that they're discs, or people are reporting small discs or something, right?
Well, let's put it this way: everything has been a lot of the Foo Fighters is just for one small area in France and Germany, where this one night fighter squadron was located. They gave that nickname to the thing, but actually it's World War II UFOs, and you got everything. You got night lights. You got to a certain extent very close encounters with the aircraft, some landings, and things like that. So I just say World War II UFOs. Now, a lot of it is not in official records, but there is a huge amount in official records, and it hasn't all been found yet. In 1943, there was small discs encountered over Schweinfurt, which is one of Germany's big giant ball bearing industrial areas. And to a certain extent, there's been some, what can I say, confabulation of other cases with the Schweinfurt case. So Schweinfurt is about the best known case, and it was a very bloody aerial battle, for these bombers to try to go in and bomb, and they encountered these discs. Now, as far as I know, nobody got hurt in the Schweinfurt raid, but there was a raid on Stuttgart, and one of these discs fell on an aircraft on a wing, and the plane caught on fire. Wow. So the commander of the 8th Air Force, Ira Eckert, wrote directly to the commander of the Army Air Forces and said, I don't know what these things are, but they're setting our aircraft on fire, and it appears to be a very big danger to us. So, and Arnold saw the possibility of these things dropped through a formation as being a possibly stopping strategic bombing in Europe. So he wrote to General Marshall, who was head of the military at the time, and Dr. Vandenberg Bush, who was the one of the main scientific advisors to the military at the time. While they were worried about it, they said there's other things that could be just as important going on, which could cause us to lose bombers. Anyways, so Arnold's on record as doing that, and I think that's why, I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure, he was concerned about anything in the air after that. Now, the OSS did find a factory in Switzerland that was making bombs about the size of these aerial bombs that they would, you could drop from an aircraft that's higher up onto a formation of aircraft. And it was a top secret finding. It's on my website if you go to 1945, the 1945 year, and the OSS document is there. So Arnold was concerned about things in the Pacific and things in the European theater. he had a special aide named Joe Chamberlain, who had worked at Columbia University, and he had also knew Elliot Ness. He had written magazine articles with Elliot Ness, and he was a special aide to Arnold. He wrote his speeches, and he did publicity work for the Army Air Forces. Arnold sent him to Europe while the war was still going on, and he went to France, and he went to the 415th Night Fighter Squadron, which was seeing these things. Now he stayed with them for, and talked to them, almost every one. He interviewed them all. Also the Bob Wilson, the AP reporter, he had also talked to these people, stayed with them, and Sergeant Edward Clark, who was a reporter for Stars and Stripes. So all these people, they gathered the Foo Fighter material firsthand. So if you see a 1950, see a World War II article which has Wilson's byline, he got this directly from the fighter pilots. So Ed Clark had seen a Foo Fighter by himself, because he went up with one of the flights on Christmas Eve, and they had encountered a Foo Fighter, and that's in the unit history, so that supports him. And he wrote about it in 1950. He said, then the Air Force scientific advisor in Europe, Arnold, sent him a message. Dr. David Griggs, who becomes the main Air Force advisor in later years after the Air Force splits off. Griggs said Arnold told him to go everywhere and find out what you can about these things. So he said, every theater I went to, we encountered these things. Didn't matter where it was. He said the Pacific ones were a little different from the ones in Europe. So he wrote a report, and his conclusion was inconclusive. He said, "I don't know what they are. They're awful strange." And he told that to Dr. McDonald, and he was in the Robertson panel. He was cited as the most knowledgeable person on. Griggs was cited as the most knowledgeable person on Foo Fighters. Keith Chester, who wrote a book called Strange Company, which I recommend highly.
Oh, yes. I've heard of that, yep.
About Foo Fighters. Griggs, or, I'm sorry, we found from the records in Europe that there was investigation in Europe. It was run by Lieutenant Colonel O'Mara, who was also in charge of the German scientists that had been captured and waiting to be transported to the United States. So O'Mara was also the head of the investigation into Foo Fighters. General McDonald was the head of intelligence in Europe. And in November 1945, after the war was over, he had sent the Pentagon a letter saying, "Hey, we've looked all at everything that Germans had and talked to German scientists, military leaders, and aviation experts, and the Germans had no idea what these were." And he said, what they are is inconclusive.
Wow.
So
Hey, I hate to break you, but we are actually right at our break. So
Okay.
we're going to have to break, and we'll be right back. I'm going to play something here on YouTube, but we'll be right back right after this break. So hang in, everyone, for these commercials, and we'll be talking to you in a minute.
All right, Martin, you can start in 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, I'm back. And hey, Jan, I have a surprise. I didn't actually tell you this, but I actually have Dave Marler joining us for a few minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Dave, how are you?
Good to see you, Martin. How you doing?
Good to see you too. So you are our surprise for the day, Dave. Dave, you've the reason I thought I'd bring you in because I know that you've been working with Jan on some projects.
Yes, I've been lucky enough to be the recipient of a number of boxes. In fact, I think Jan just got back from the post office a few hours ago and shipped about another 5 boxes out to me today. And I have 10 I think I need to pick up tonight at the mailbox. So he's been sharing a lot of his historical material. And I'm happy to say, without going into too much detail, because there's some big surprises that we'll be announcing in the next week and a half or so. But we're working on, with the help of a financial benefactor, to digitize some of the paper files and some of the microfilm reels that Jan has shared with me. And as Jan alluded to just a few days ago when we were chatting, some of this material has never been seen by the larger UFO community. Many of these are scrapbooks, news clippings dating back to the early 1950s all the way up until the late 60s, early 70s, as well as some of the early CSI documents, Civilian Saucer Intelligence of New York. And certainly I can let Jan speak a little bit more to that. He knows the history much better than I do. But I do just want to say, since I have this opportunity with you and your audience, when I first got involved in UFOs, and I think I told Jan this in a recent phone call, I was starting to learn about the people, the places, the cases, etc. And I kept coming across references to this Jan Aldrich.
Yeah.
And And at that time, I'm talking in 1990, I was hard pressed to even find a picture of Jan Aldrich. And I'm like, who is this mysterious character? I keep seeing his name on everything. And, years later, fast forward, not only had the chance to get to meet Jan, to get to know him as an individual, but, respect his work even more, getting to know his work ethic, his tenacity. Some people, Martin, as you know, and many of your audience members know, people come in and out of the UFO field. It's very rare that you find someone that sticks with this subject with such tenacity as Jan Aldrich has done over decades, not months, not years, decades, and has done so and has diligently worked to bring this history to light. And I think even people that are involved in UFOs sometimes fail to realize the rich history that we have. Quite often on these television shows, much to the detriment of, I think, UFO research, they focus on the same cases ad infinitum, ad nauseum. There's only so many times we can hear about Bentwaters or the Phoenix Lights or the January 5th, 2000 case that I personally investigated. And not that they're not good cases, don't get me wrong, but these producers, they always want to focus on the sensational cases. But some of the most intriguing information is buried in these obscure reports that Jan has gathered going through military archives, going through scrapbooks. And, one case is fascinating, but I think when we make an argument for the reality of the UFO phenomenon, we're looking at patterns in the data. And in so doing, you have to go through the minutia of government files, scrapbooks, newspaper archives. And to me, it's when you start connecting those dots and you start to show there's patterns in the data, that is what's most intriguing. And myself and other researchers couldn't do that without the efforts of people like Jan Aldrich.
Right. Hey, Jan, we'll go back and engage with where you were talking about the Foo Fighters in a bit. But while Dave's here, have you ever been really discouraged? He just mentioned how you've hung in for decades, but I know a lot of people that have been at this topic I've spoken to that just want to throw in the towel sometimes when they get fed up with where the UFO field is going. Have you ever felt that way?
Yes, many times.
Well, I thought so, but you hang in, and what makes you hang in?
There's so much mysterious stuff, and this explanation and that explanation don't work. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And what really angers me is one very prominent scientist says, I don't study cases and I don't study UFOs, but he is on every show that he can possibly get on with his opinion. Yeah. So it's an advertisement for ignorance.
Yeah.
Would this
particular person work for an organization?
Oh yeah. I
think I know who you're talking about.
Main scientist. He's on every UFO program you can imagine.
Yeah. And his first name begin with an S?
Yes, it does.
Okay. I know exactly what you're talking about, but we're not going to bring up his name.
I love that, you can explain everything without ever doing research or, just 15 seconds after you hear something, you can come up with a supposed explanation. This is beyond me. It's unscientific.
Right.
And I have no explanation for UFOs. I'm sorry, I don't. And that's a lot of experience there. I've read thousands and thousands of reports. And many of them are just trivial. But there's so many that aren't. There's enough that aren't that makes it look like something needs to be done.
Well, as I've heard many times said, that it only takes one real case, one, wherever they're coming from. I mean, I mention on this show quite often, this is my 9th year doing the show. I know less than I did before I started. I mean, maybe I thought I knew something, but we don't.
Right.
You run the other way from someone who knows everything.
Ted Blocher, who's worked for CSI New York, he said after being in it for decades, he said, this is where I came in. It's like coming into a movie you've already seen, but you still don't understand what's happening.
Huh.
So,
yeah, that's fascinating. So, Dave, back to you. Are you going to, I mean, you just keep getting more files and more files. Do you have a lot of property?
No, actually, I was remarking to Jan on the phone just the other day that we're running into a square footage issue here. So short of building an underground bunker, I'm not quite sure what we're going to do, but
it's not a bad idea.
we may allocate some of my holdings to UNM before my death rather than after my death, just to accommodate the influx of some very exciting materials. Let me just say that in the next week or two. And Jan's a big part of that.
Anything to say about it? If he doesn't allocate the materials to University of New Mexico, he may be dead.
Yeah, they're chomping at the bit for this information. They really want to preserve this, and they see historical value, as does Jan and myself, with regard to this information, regardless of your take on it. And that's how I pitched it to them. Whether you relegate, UFOs to fact, fiction, or folklore, it's part of our history, it's part of our culture. And just by virtue of that, we should be preserving this material. Whether you're a sociologist that wants to look back on the 20th century and say it's a space age myth, which I doubt. I agree with Jan. There's just a preponderance of cases that defy conventional explanation. And, I share the same frustration that he does. The most unscientific people that have approached this subject historically, with rare exceptions, are scientists. They're making assumptions. They're making proclamations based on no evidence. And I would task them what I task myself and other UFO researchers with. And that is, whatever we say, whatever we promote or put forth as a working hypothesis, it has to be data driven. You have to back it up with something. And I relegate the skeptics just as much as I relegate the ardent, wide-eyed UFO believers. When you accept everything without any critical thinking skills, it's just as bad as those that refute everything without taking the time to look at the evidence.
Exactly.
And I relegate all of that to what I call cognitive laziness. You're not using any brain cells in either case.
Yeah. And, what is that saying? Never underestimate the power of, I hate to use this word, but never underestimate the power of stupid people.
Well, I mean,
in masses. Yeah. Yeah.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but yes, I think that's good. I'm not looking at this as a religion. I'm not looking at this as I'm finding evidence to support my preconceived belief system. Like Jan would agree. The vast majority of UFO reports can be discounted as Venus, as a satellite, as a jet aircraft, you name it. And many of those have been proven false over the years, especially as we realize that there was military testing in certain areas at certain times that, when pilots in the 50s said, we saw something, but it was flying faster and higher than any aircraft we knew of. Well, that's the operative phrase right there, that they knew of. They didn't know about the SR-71. They didn't know about the U-2. And in retrospect, again, which is why we have the value of having these historic files, we can go back and maybe summarily discount some of those reports. But to Jan's earlier point, there are those that are extraordinary. There are those that have extreme high strangeness, especially the radar visual cases. And there are a lot of those going back to the 50s and 60s. To me, that is some severe information that we're dealing with when you have multiple military witnesses, both ground and air based, and you have ground and air based radar that confirms it. So yes, yeah. And there are so many cases that have never been discussed publicly. And as Jan was alluding to me the other day, some of these microfilms that he's sending me, and I'll let him speak to that if he likes a little bit. But some of these have never been digitized. They've never been widely circulated. And that's our shared goal, is to try to get this material digitized and shared with the UFO community at large.
Now, Jan, let me ask you this, because Dave just made a good point. When there's radar evidence and there's actual visual evidence. I've brought this thing up, for instance, when I had Seth Shostak, who you mentioned, we sort of hinted to, on my show. I said, what about that? And they always have an answer. Oh, well, that's a weather anomaly or this or that. You always hear, no matter, for instance, the Nimitz case, they had all different types of radar data and discounting it all as, this or that. What do you say to people like that when you hear that, Jan?
Oh, it's, they never engage with me that much. Especially producers that put together shows. They usually, they don't tell you who's going to be on with you and who's going to get the last word.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
it always changes on the cutting room.
I did 2 cases for the Smithsonian, and they had somebody that came on and knocked the heck out of what I was saying, but and I did the cases that the Smithsonian wanted me to do. In other words, what the producer did. I didn't necessarily do the best cases, like the incident of firing on a UFO in the summer of '52 from Kirkland Air Force Base. That was one of the cases I did, and I'm talking about it, and this guy says he's reading it out of Ruppelt, and I told him, I looked at him and I said, listen to me. I've got more data than Ruppelt had. I said, I have talked to the intelligence officer in New Mexico who was in charge of this case. I have notes from Dr. Page, who was at the Robertson panel. And one of the things it's interesting, one of the things that Alvarez, who was on the Dr. Alvarez, is definitely one of the top radar scientists ever. And his complaint about the data that he was shown at the Robertson panel was, I don't care what the operator felt. I don't care, if they said they've never seen anything like this before. He said, I've been in the development of radar. You've got to give me quantitative and qualitative data. And I don't care about people's feelings about what they saw on the radar screen. And
that's good.
With the Minot case, of course, we have that. And a number of others. And I think he was wrong to say, well, we should just go ahead and brush all this stuff aside instead of to say we need more and better data on UFOs. Not, we need to debunk this subject.
Right. Right. Dave, do you mind hanging out with us, or do you have things to do?
No, I've got a few minutes if you want me to hang on.
Yeah. Jan, I'm just going to keep Dave on for a few minutes, but while you're here, Dave, I have to ask you this question because I know a lot of people visit you and want to look at your files and stuff. What's the number one thing people want to see when they come there?
It varies considerably, and that's I was just mentioning to someone the other day on the phone that whenever I acquire material, regardless of my like or dislike of it, for example, let's say like 50s contactee material, I collect it because I don't know, to your question, what someone's going to be interested in researching when they come here. Now, certainly they'll contact me ahead of time and say, I'm working on this. Do you have anything? Yes, come on by. But I will tell you, it's usually what they come away with is not what they came here to look for. Because when they walk through the door and they see the volume of material, it's just a deer in the headlights. And inevitably they get distracted. They think that they want to look at this over here, but then this file cabinet or this collection of case files totally captivates them. And they wind up taking their entire weekend going through all that. And they didn't even touch on this. And inevitably people say, well, I'm going to have to schedule another visit. In fact, I've got a researcher from Colorado. We're waiting for COVID to get behind us, and he plans on making another trip. I also have, I will mention this, just to give you an idea, the variety of requests. Right when COVID hit, right around March, I was contacted by a PhD researcher out of California. And I think I had told Jan this the other day. He is interested in any type of material pertaining to scientists in the 1950s that were researching UFOs. And I responded by saying, well, you would be interested in seeing the Dr. Leon Davidson material. I said, I have his correspondence collection. And his voice went up several octaves. He goes, what? He goes, you're kidding me. He goes, well, he goes, you know that Columbia University has his collection in New York. I said, yeah. I said that they have their holdings listed online. He goes, well, I contacted them, and he goes, to my surprise, they didn't have any of his correspondence. I said, no, they have the books, the journals, and things of that nature, which I already have here. I said, but I was contacted through a friend of a friend about two and a half years ago now, I guess. And a self-proclaimed dumpster diver out of New York was pulling this historic material out of a trash dumpster because the family was throwing it away. And Jan had the opportunity. Jan was out here about a year and a half ago, and he had a chance to go through some of that material. But we have correspondence with Kenneth Arnold. We have correspondence with a lot of the early UFO researchers from the 1950s. There's even signed letters from J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Johnson when he was a senator on a Senate subcommittee, and lots of foreign correspondence. So this researcher, he was just completely blown away. He goes, that's exactly what I was looking for, was his original correspondence. I said, well, it's here. And so we're waiting for COVID to finish up, and he'll probably be one of the first researchers out here. But I never know what subject matter they're looking for or what their thesis is. You know, are they here to poo-poo the UFO subject, or are they here as a UFO proponent because they believe in the reality of it? And again, I think I'd mentioned this to Jan the other day, or one of the other researchers I was talking to. I view this collection as a true library. When you go into a library, Martin, they don't ask you, well, why do you want that information on World War II? Are you a Nazi sympathizer? Or are you an anti-Holocaust person? They don't ask you those questions. It's like, you're interested in World War II? Here's our holdings. And even if a skeptic wanted to contact me and go through my material, I would respect that. I'm not here to censor any researcher, regardless of their take on the subject matter. It's just simply providing the material to those that are interested in looking at it.
Wow. I wonder if you could put a number on the hours you have on organizing alone.
Oh, well, God. Well, I've done a lot. Let's just say that much. But I'll let Jan speak to that, because I think Jan was not only impressed with the amount of material, even though it doesn't even come close to what he has, but I think Jan appreciated my sense of organization.
Well, he mentioned earlier that he has stuff all over his desk and all over the place. But you know what? I bet he knows where everything is.
Well, I always say when it comes to UFOs, I'm OCD.
Dave, thank you so much. I'm so glad you were able to join us.
Absolutely. It's great. And I'm glad you have Jan on tonight, because he's really one of the unsung heroes in ufology. There's a lot of loud voices out there in the field, but when it comes to the quality, the history, the lineage, and the tradition that he's created, I mean, Jan was a role model for myself in looking at the history, and I'm learning a lot from him, as we continue to collaborate, and hopefully we'll continue to collaborate as we look into 2021.
Just one more question, Dave, before you go. Do you see anyone coming up that may have a similar, energy to do what you're doing? Is there anyone else coming in the field, you and Jan, what you're both doing?
I don't know of anyone younger than me, and more people are younger than me than older than me as I get older. I think we can all say that. I don't see anyone doing it with the let's say, the level of commitment. Certainly there are people out there that are researching. I don't know if it's to the degree that I'm doing it. And I would say I'm certainly not doing it to the degree that Jan has over the years. I mean, he has been like a pit bull when it comes to gathering this information and piecing together the history of ufology.
Wow, amazing. Well, I sure hope to make it out there someday. It'd be great to see you and actually to see everything. But you know how I am about like antiques and art and vintage, and oh boy, I'm going to have trouble leaving.
Well, our mutual friend Charles, the other day, I told you we had a conversation.
Yeah, Charles Lear. Yeah.
We're conspiring to get you out here one way or the other.
Well, I hope it happens. All right, Dave. Will you take care?
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Bye now. Jan, that was great to have him in here. And I'm glad you are working with Dave. wonderful person. When
Yeah,
we
you
left,
have to know that I'm the handsome one.
okay. I hope he's still listening and he heard that.
I think he
When
is.
we went into break, you were I believe you said something along the lines that the Germans had no idea what these were. Is that what you said, or
One of
something
the
like that?
people, Omar had talked to German scientists, German aviation people, all kinds of people, and of course, there's the big thing about Nazi super science and everything. General Putt, who was top intelligence officer, had written to the Colonel McCoy out there at the right field, and he said, "Listen, these guys were 10 years ahead of us on paper, but no, they weren't. They weren't Supermen, and they had managed to drive all the scientists away. I mean, physics was considered Jewish science, and it amazes me that people are saying, well, these guys were so smart, and they actually contacted UFO beings, and they had all kinds of special stuff that they did. Quite frankly, it's just a romanticized thing, and trying to make the Nazis into some kind of heroes or things like that. There's still people that think that, that these are wonderful people. The guys that go around carrying Nazi flags at demonstrations and stuff. But there's plenty of people that seem to think the Nazi myth in ufology is true. If you go to right field, you can see a lot of the aircraft that were brought back by Colonel Seashore. Yeah, it was called Project Seahorse. Seahorse. Colonel Seashore was the guy that organized all the aircraft that had been picked up in Germany by Colonel, later General Harold Watson, Watson's Wizards. They were flying aircraft that, probably weren't airworthy. And they flew, as they captured them, they flew them into France and finally to Marseilles, and they were put on a British aircraft carrier and taken back to the United States. A lot of them are at right field. If you go to a museum there, you can see them, and also plans that the Germans had. But
wow.
they weren't. They were further ahead in design, but they weren't necessarily further ahead in other things. They had the first jets. The Russians also had a group of people called the Grid. They were real smart, but Stalin put them all in the Gulag for years, so they lost their advantage. So there's things like that. And I hate to get into the Nazi. It's very popular in ufology, the Nazi myth that they somehow had some kind of secret base in Antarctica. It's glorification of really bad people.
I've heard that over the years.
Right.
Yeah. And I think in the recent years, someone's saying now Russia has a base up there too. I don't know. It's crazy. But
yeah, there is a lot. There's unbelievable. Without any proof, you can't. Nobody can offer any proof that any of this happened. Yeah, the Russians explored Antarctica in the 30s with one ship. They did not send a colony down there.
Right.
Somebody had a game about, I think it's in South America, about Russian, Nazi Nazi colonies in Antarctica. It was like a game, and the people in the United States, they're taking this stuff seriously. It's hard to swallow. And I have a degree in history, and I spent 7 years almost 8 years in Europe. A good part of it in Germany. I did talk to people over in Germany. No, I have a lot of problem with that kind of thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions that I'd like to ask you about the myths that you hear about over the years. But right now we have a question that popped up. Did anyone see any, during World War II, it was just the crafts or whatever they were themselves. They didn't see any like beings or anything like that, right?
Let me put it like this: there are sightings that came out long after the war. There's one in England. I think there's one from New Zealand, of people that encountered supposed occupants from UFOs. So these are close encounters.
Interesting.
If you go into some of the Eastern European literature now, once the East became free, all kinds of stories came out. I've got one here, is UFOs over Poland, the land of high strangeness. And they talk about early in the war, an occupant case. So yeah, these we've encountered those. Now these are even harder to nail down because most of the people that saw it are dead, and they were under communism for so long. These almost became legend type things that got passed around. Couldn't really talk about them, but there are cases in the U.S. too. Gordon Lohr and Harold Denault's UFOs in Perspective. They have a few even pre-World War II occupant cases.
Really? Wow.
Second World War II. So, when I started doing 1947, Project 1947, people would tell me all the time, well, 1947, UFOs at a distance, that's, just really at the outer range of vision. I said, no, you're wrong. My research shows that almost everything that is happening today happened in 1947. Electromagnetic cases, physiological cases, people being affected by being close to a UFO, occupant cases, real close approaches of aircraft. So it's not, everybody's got this idea they already know everything, and you've got to do research. And especially UFO history is boring to most people now. They don't want to read Ruppelt. It's passé. I tell them the two books they should have, because they're real cheap, is a copy of the Report on Unidentified Flying Objects and UFO Evidence #1, because that thing it's pretty well held. Over the years, it's proved to be a fairly good assessment of what was happening in the 50s and early 60s, and it's cheap. You can get it for $1.25 on Amazon, and you can get Ruppelt's book in paperback for 50 cents. So, and those are good places to start. And just move out from there.
Yeah.
If you want to know about history, you have to read something like that.
Yeah, that's true. You had mentioned the Robertson panel earlier on, and I know in your work there's some new light on the Robertson panel. Can you share that with us?
Well, one thing, everybody's confused about what actually the Robertson panel put out. Part of what they signed was a recommendation that UFOs be debunked. It was not an order, it was a recommendation. And it went from the CIA to the intelligence agencies committee, the IAC. It went from there to Department of Defense, and then it went to the Air Force. Now, each level that transmitted the recommendations from the Robertson panel said to the next organization that they sent it to, this may be of interest to you. In other words, they did not say, you will do this. They said, this may be of interest to you. It got to General Stanford in the Air Force, who was head of intelligence for the Air Force. And he's the one, he says, he said in one of his memos to General Garland, come and see me. We were going to talk about this report. He's the one that pretty well, it looks like, he's the one that took those recommendations and ran with them. So everybody's got this little historical thing that says, oh, the Robertson panel demanded or ordered that this happen. No. Decision was made at Air Force level, it looks like. And so once again, you've got to do research. You've got to do research and find these things. It's very nice to say, oh, this happened. This is the way it happened. It didn't happen that way.
Well, let me ask you this, Jan. When today, the internet can be a double-edged sword. You might find information that you'd never find any other way, but you might find false information too. How do you sort through that if you're really interested in researching?
Well, some of it, you just have to it's hard to sort through this stuff. Now, people make mistakes all the time about information and put out false information, and you can check that against what we know for a fact. You can go against let's talk about one. Supposedly, if you know about the Battle of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
1940.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So the Woods had a document that they tried to insinuate into the documents from the Battle of Los Angeles. Timothy Cooper supposedly supplied him this document. It says that Admiral Anderson is aware. Supposedly, it says, well, there's some kind of recovery of a shot down UFO, and it says that Admiral Anderson is aware of this, in one of the documents that Cooper gave to the Woods. Problem is, if you look at where Admiral Anderson was during the Battle of Los Angeles, he was nowhere. He was at one time the head of Office of Naval Intelligence, but at that time he was not. He was in charge of battleships in the Pacific, and he was working feverishly to get those battleships that were salvageable back online. He was not working about the Battle of Los Angeles. Now, how did this mistake be made? The Navy, when there's a lot of officers that change position in a short time, because that's what happened after Pearl Harbor, a number of officers became head of naval intelligence for maybe 1 or 2 months, and then they moved on. So Anderson was gone from naval intelligence during the Battle of Los Angeles. And the Navy said in its history, the incumbent in 1941 was Admiral Anderson. The problem with that is they didn't talk about all the other officers that had been head of naval intelligence. So Cooper was caught making up a fake document saying that Anderson was head of naval intelligence in February 1942. And he was tripped up by the Navy in the way that they write their histories. So that was that's one way to check. Yeah. Check it against what you know. Now, Gordon Cooper said he wrote himself into 1957 filming of a UFO at Edwards Air Force Base. Well, we interviewed the guys that filmed the UFO. They said Cooper was not in charge of us. He didn't take the film and send it to the Pentagon, and it was never seen again. That didn't happen. So, unfortunately, Gordon Cooper, a hero, astronaut, towards the end of his life, he got into these things where he would make strange claims and write himself into history that you could tell was not correct. Cooper endorsed Daniel Fry, a contactee, in his book, Leap of Faith. So, even though we should honor Cooper's service, at the end of his life, he had come around with some strange beliefs, and he's not the only one. And there's people that write themselves into situations, and research says, "Hey, no, he wasn't there. He's not." And it's tragic in some cases. General Vandenberg supposedly sent back the estimate of the situation in 1948. No, there's nothing that says that. There's nothing that you can find that it's hard to find stuff on the estimate of the situation, but you can't say that. Ruppelt only says that it went up the chain of command. Everybody thinks, a lot of people in ufology think the chain of command at that time for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was the intelligence chain. No, it was the logistics, research and development chain. And since they can't find anything in intelligence, they're not looking in the right place. They should look for hints of where things happen for the estimate of the situation in the logistics research and development chain of command. Also, the Navy did an analysis of the interplanetary conclusion of the estimate of the situation. It's not based on the estimate of the situation. It's based on the Project Sign interim report of 30 November 1948, which we do not have. We do not have that. But in the Navy analysis, he quotes from that document. So there we have some information about this. It's like a detective story. Now, I've tried to get the November 30th, 1948 signed interim report from the archives, and they just blew me off saying, well, it's in the Project Blue Book files. No, it isn't. The way I go at researching is I go to where the documents are. I turn them over page by page.
Yeah.
And you find things that you don't know what, you have no idea that it was there. One of the things I found is the CIA was founded in September 1947. Before that, there was what was called the Central Intelligence Group within the Pentagon, and there was the Office of Director of Central Intelligence before there was a CIA. In other words, Vandenberg, for one, was DCI. Hillenkotter was the first head of the CIA. Now, going through a microfilm from just general correspondence from within the Air Force. Here's a letter from Hillenkotter, and he's writing to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and he's saying, I do not intend to have a air technical intelligence section in the CIA. I will use the assets of the Air Force at Wright-Patterson and the Navy aviation assets at the Bureau of Aviation for the Navy. In other words, he's more or less farming out this part of his intelligence thing to organizations that already exist. Now that is just found just by turning over pages, and there's no other pages around it that actually address this. And I'm saying, well, this is a great document that shows us some understanding about what's going on at the time.
Right. Wow.
I found a lot of documents like that, just turning page after page over.
It must be so great to actually see these things firsthand.
Right.
I've done a lot of research myself. I'm an appraiser and have done a lot of work in libraries and things, long before the internet. And I love to actually hold something like that in my hand. It really, there's really nothing like it.
Right. And it's where you least expect it. Where you think you're going to find something, you find a dry hole.
Mm-hmm.
Where you least expect it, you find something like that.
Now, what was you did some really looking into the Twining memo, right?
Right. Okay, people, yeah, this is, you have to have some military background. That's the problem. Military correspondence is, well, first of all, there's a reason that somebody writes a letter. They don't just sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write a memo on AMC opinion of flying discs. You don't just sit down and do that. You do it for some reason. This is going to be a little complicated and long-winded. If you need to save it for another time.
Yeah, we only have, let's see, we have about 7 minutes left. But I know the Condom Committee, that's another one. That was, I think, 1973. I believe that's when that concluded. No, I'm sorry. That was 66 through 68, right?
Right.
Yeah. And you made a reference of NICAP in the Condom Committee. And how does that reference?
Well, one of the things that Condon was doing, he was getting a lot of his best stuff from NICAP. They had agreed to a cooperation. I mean, NICAP thought this was going to be a real honest scientific investigation. So they were sending files to Condon to look at. They were also using their investigative network to let Condon know early on about reports that they were receiving. And Dave mentioned the CSI files, which is CSI NICAP files, really. The Air Force went ahead and microfilmed those. And NICAP cooperated by letting them do that. They microfilmed them. The Library of Congress microfilmed them under an Air Force contract. That's another thing that most people don't know about. So this is about 4 microfilms of sightings that are not necessarily in the file. So that's why Dave was saying, well, we need to get this microfilm digitized so we can add these to our files. In the middle of the Condon Committee work, that trick memo was found, where it says the trick of this is to make it look like us as a group of scientists who don't really expect to find anything are doing objective work. So a lot of people seized on that as this whole thing is a trick. And of course, NICAP, they decided to end their cooperation with the Condon report, even though Condon wasn't doing that much. I mean, if you look at the number of reports that NICAP submitted to Condon, you know, when the things were going on just a few days before, they would, submit all these reports that they were getting. And like Dick Hall said at I think it was the 76 MUFON meeting, he had sketches of UFO reports that they had sent to Condon. They had sent the case to Condon, but he had sketches of the reports, and these look all like craft sightings. They don't look like, night lights or something seen at a far distance. They're all things that are close. And he says, here's a picture, here's the drawings from these witnesses, and most of them Condon didn't even look at. The Condon Committee didn't even look at.
Yeah, and
they're just fascinating to look at the sketches and say, geez, what's the story behind this? And of course, the story is in the UFO Files, because they got the NICAP files. So,
Wow. So you
Yep.
know, just from what I'm gathering is, there's more than one side to a lot of what's going on here that is just not deeply researched by your average person looking into the topic.
right. The people that I respect are the ones that go out and try to figure out what happened in the field and actually go to where the guy saw the sighting and get a halfway decent interview and get him to fill out a report for him. These are real important actions, and it may be drudge work for a lot of people, but you have to admire the investigators, the on the scene investigators that go out there.
Oh yeah, they're volunteering their time and
Yeah,
trying to look into a plausible explanation for what happened.
yeah. Now they may have funny
explainable.
ideas about what happened, but after a while, after you read some of the investigations by these people, you can get a feeling for actually how they approach the subject, even if they might have funny ideas about the subject. Does that bias their investigation? And that's one of the things I'm interested in. And I find a lot of people that have screwball ideas actually do good investigation.
How about that? I hate to say it, Jan, but we are at the end of our show. And I want to thank you so much. And I encourage everyone to go and check out Project 1947 and .com. So check that out. Jan, thank you so much. It's been a real honor to have you on the show.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you take care.
Right.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening tonight. So next week we have James Fox. He's going to be on for the first 55 minutes, and then our blogger and audio blogger, the one and only Charles Lear, will be covering the rest of the show. Thanks so much for watching, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.